In this video, I am going to talk to you about a subwoofer that you are likely already very familiar with, but maybe not quite like this. And imagine the situation: you wake up and decide, today's the day I'm going to upgrade my subwoofer. I want fast bass, I want powerful bass, I want a real kick-ass subwoofer, and I want it to be red. I wonder how many of you have had that combination of thoughts, but maybe after this video, you will. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about my experience with two REL Acoustics T9X red subwoofers, and one of them you can see there behind me. And straight away, there is a problem with this review, because if you go to the REL website, you will see that the red T9X is sold out, and that is because this was a limited edition. And when REL asked me to review these subwoofers, that was the first thing I mentioned to them. Why am I reviewing something that somebody can't buy? And they told me, don't worry, just have a play with them, see what you think, because maybe there'll be more limited edition subwoofers coming in the future, and there is an inside scoop for you. So yes, this is a T9X subwoofer, and I had one of the first review samples available back in April 2021. And nearly 65,000 of you have watched that review, so many of you will know the T9X well. And I dare say many of you watching this video might already own a T9X, some of you might own a couple of them, and that's great because I think it's a fantastic subwoofer that's perfectly suited to certain situations. Because of course, for the same money you can buy much larger, more powerful, much larger driver subwoofers, and you might prefer that or want that for larger rooms or high SPL home cinema bass. That makes sense. But I think the T9X strikes a really nice sweet spot for what I'm going to call a real world size room, a real world lounge or living room or apartment, because the T9X strikes the balance of its performance for its price and physical size and its appearance, and segues lovely into the big red elephant in the room, because nearly every subwoofer I have seen in someone's home has been black. A couple of times I've seen white or wood to match the speakers, but never once red. And I would never have thought to have a red subwoofer. I would have never chosen a red subwoofer. But now with two of them sat looking very svelte, next to some KEF R11 Meta speakers, I love the red. I think it looks awesome. Mostly because the sub is not too big, and there are some visual contrasts that break up the strong colour, such as the driver and the REL logo top plate. But I'm not as keen on the looks of the red with the grille on, but your mileage may well vary, especially if you have cats or young children, because you might want to protect that driver. But let's start with what is familiar, and it will be the main form factor, because this is the same size as a normal T9X subwoofer. The 300 watt amplifier and amp plate on the rear are a standard T9X affair too, which is totally fine because the connections and controls are already familiar, especially if you're into a wireless connection. I use a wired high-level connection, as I have two REL baseline blue cables plumbed into this room, hidden behind the acoustic treatment, and this works perfect for me given where the subwoofers are always going to be. So what is new here? Well, apart from the very fancy Italian sports car red paint and the very fancy REL logo top plate, which is very nice, I have to say, the big change is to the subwoofer's driver. Not the downfiring passive radiator, which I'm pretty sure is the same as the standard T9X. And again, it's surprising to see there is a logo on the passive radiator that no one will ever see as it's underneath, but kudos to REL for that attention to detail. The big change is to the forward firing driver. This is the driver on a standard T9X, which has an aluminium center cap that is intended to be a stiff, strong and light center to the driver, critical for its performance. With the red, this has changed to a carbon fiber center cap that REL say shaves 10 grams off of the weight, giving the overall system a faster response and 1.2 dB more output. And because this main driver is such an integral part of the Red's design, I asked REL to send me one so we could all have a look at it. And here she is. And at first it maybe doesn't look too special. But when you hold the driver in your hands, it's oddly unbalanced because there is a huge amount of weight in the thick, what looks like a double magnet system, but there is hardly any weight at the driver end. In fact, the driver end is so light, it feels quite a bizarre thing to hold in your hands. So I now know that REL's claim that they use very light drivers in their subwoofers is 100% true. You know, they're not bullshitting anyone with that fact. So that's been quite a reassuring discovery. I suppose the last new thing to talk about here are the different feet or legs. And again, this is the original T9X. I think the feet look nice and I have no complaints here at all. But when we compare them to the newly designed feet on the Red, I think it's clear the Red's feet have an extra touch of class about them, and I like the look that little bit more. So the T9X Red is shaping up to kind of be like a mini carbon special REL subwoofer, but there are a few key details missing. I think the Red would look so fantastic if it had the S range and above silver handles on the side with the recessed out side to the cabinet. I think that would look fantastic on this subwoofer and really like lift and elevate its visual appearance. Maybe that's me asking a bit much for a subwoofer at this price, but it would definitely be nice. And the other thing that I think would really set off the look of this Red subwoofer would be the removal of the black grommets that hold the grill on. And instead, REL would use some kind of magnet system. And I asked them about this, and they told me it's hard to have a magnet system for a subwoofer due to the forces that can act upon the grill. But either way, I think a solid colour front to the subwoofer would look better than having the black grommets there. But maybe that's just me being a greedy audiophile who's never satisfied. Time to talk sound quality and setup, and REL did initially come and set the Reds up in this room, but after that I completely changed them and started from scratch so that I could get the same experience you might do if you purchased these and took them home. And also I have my own way of setting up subwoofers. I like to use them or use more of them than a lot of people do, and by that I mean I like to use them with higher crossovers than you think you might do with specific speakers like the larger KEF R11 Meta there. But that only works if the subwoofers can deliver enough high quality, fast enough bass to at least keep up with the speakers. And of course, that's really important. And it also boils down to, setup and how you do it, your process, and especially time alignment, the bass time alignment with the speakers. And I wonder how many people even think about that as part of their subwoofer setup, something that I'm really massively focused on. And that's where there's an advantage for a more compact subwoofer like a T9X. Because it's smaller, because it's not massively heavy, it's easy to just slide them around. You can just nudge them forward and nudge them back. The pair of them to try and find the best spot where the bass locks in focus and balances best across the left and the right soundstage. And because we're using a high level connection, of course, the subwoofer is kind of acting like an extension to the speaker. And it definitely does when you use a higher crossover, because the speakers and the subwoofers are both playing the same bass. And they would be anyway using a subwoofer like this with a larger speaker like the R11 Meta. So the time alignment, the level, the crossover and the phase are all critical things to think about for the setup. And I started with the subs sat just behind the KEF speakers, as that spot in this room is usually great for subwoofers, and that is where you'll see them placed for a lot of this video's B-roll, just because of how I shot that through the review process. And this was a great position with just one Red. I integrated the first one super easy. However, when I added the second REL, the bass was hitting the room just a little bit too much in a specific frequency region, which actually is a good sign of the T9X having a bit more output than I was expecting. So I pulled the subs forward to be just in front of the KEF speakers, pulling them more away from the room's boundaries. I changed the phase and also turned the volume up about 2 clicks on each. But remember, I am using a higher crossover here, and I didn't actually measure. Normally I could measure this and say exactly where the crossover is, but I'm guesstimating it was in the 60 to 70 hertz region, which is higher than you think you would need with a larger speaker like the KEF R11 Meta, a full range floor standing speaker. But I do this really quite deliberately. And I've got to say, once I had the speakers and subwoofers all dialed in, the subwoofer level, crossover, that was all dialed in, it was sounding pretty fantastic, but I was still getting a little bit too much bass very deep down. And I think that's probably more the speakers than the subwoofer, but again, we're listening to both. So that's where a product like the Eversolo A6 really is great, because it has a very easy to use equalizer built in. Using a parametric equalizer, I could take 24 hertz down about 7 dB, which just take off that bit of room ringing and resonance, tweak the rest, and I've got to say, the RELs plus the KEF with this system here was sounding pretty fantastic. And I ended up listening to a whole variety of music, from big bass hitting hip hop, light drum and bass, some dance music, various commercial stuff, through to some jazz. And doing the classic sub on and off test is always the best way to see what the subs are doing or taking away, especially when you have a really fantastic integration, because it's nearly impossible to tell what the speakers and what the subwoofers are doing by ear. You cannot tell what is doing what, even a tiny bit. And the subwoofer's on and off effect was pretty much the same for every song, but I'm going to give you an example with the track Birds by Dominic Phil's Amy, because it's a track that everybody's probably familiar with. And the KEF R11 Meta on their own did a fantastic job of organising and laying out the soundstage organisation, the layers of that music fantastically well. So at the beginning of that track, you have a big double bass back right behind the speakers, then you have a vocal that's slightly off centre, sat back behind the speakers as well. And that whole track was put together by the KEFs, fantastically well layered. But I like that song and a lot of music to have really a lot of big bass impact in the room. So like, the big double bass is something that you experience happening in the room, and the big bass effects just kind of hit the room, and you can see them forming in the room. You see them forming, of course, through your ears. And the KEF on their own, their bass is just very play it safe for me in a certain frequency region, in this 50, 60, 70 hertz region, and down until it's very deep. So you don't quite get that same in the room, visceral, tangible bass effect from them on their own. However, when you add the RELs, integrated setup well, all of a sudden that bass becomes, like I said, this physical thing that's happening in the room that you see happening. Obviously you're hearing it, you're seeing it through your ears, but you can see it happening. That big double bass all of a sudden it's bigger, more grand, and the whole sound is just more full, it's more warm, it's more pleasing, it's more dimensional, because the bass fills in the soundstage, so the things that are happening left and right are now bigger and more grand and more present in the room, and it's just a more interesting, exciting, more engaging way to listen to that song. With KEFs on their own, it's like, yeah, I sit and just listen to it, it's okay. With the subs on, it's something you now experience. And that to me is what really good hi-fi should do. You pay a lot of money for this hi-fi, it should give you an experience for every single song. And I find there's a lot of speakers out there that are fantastic, but their bass delivery is just not big enough to give us that experience. And with those speakers, that's where a subwoofer or subwoofers becomes essential. But talking specifically about the bass of the T9X Red, the first thing you notice is it's very nimble and light on its feet. And you will often hear people say that about REL subwoofers, but there definitely seems to be a noticeable uptick in the definition of bass notes from the Red. Where there would normally be a bit of bass throb, the Red unpacks that throb into separate bass layers. But you don't listen to the Red and think this is a lightning fast stop-start type of subwoofer, because I would hate it if that's how it sounded. Mechanical stop-start bass is not pleasurable. The Red has got this nice kind of flowy vibe to its bass. It's got that nice kind of bouncy, vibey. Some people would say that's musical bass. It's just like a nice vibey bass, but I think it just unpacks the tension or the congestion of the bass notes that you sometimes get that little bit better. Not massively better, but just a little bit better. And that's nice. It's enjoyable. It's definitely pleasing. And I remember experiencing something like this with the standard T9X, and I called it speaker-like bass. And that is still the case with the Red, of course. But I think the Red has a little bit more balls about it, so the bass feels a little bit more substantial, while also digging out a bit more bass articulation and detail. And I wonder if that's all to do with the driver being just that little bit lighter and maybe a little bit stiffer. And then the driver just recovers that little bit quicker or that little bit better. So it has less memory in it, or what's called hysteresis. And that memory, that would be like that memory or the energy storage in that driver would be what thickens the bass. And if that energy's not there, maybe it can just be that little bit quicker and more nimble and articulate, but I'm just guessing there. However, this is still a T9X, so it's still a 300 watt 10-inch subwoofer, and that kind of subwoofer doesn't hit the room in the same way as larger driver subwoofers can. So you don't get as much room weightiness to the bass, which means the bass is not as heavy on you, or it doesn't throb your body as much, and it doesn't wrap around you as much with that big warm pressure feeling, as larger subwoofers can do. So that is something to think about here, depending on what you're looking for or your situation. This is important to think about. But I also think this is where the Red has that advantage for its speed and articulation, because it's not feeding as much big pressure into a room like a big, larger driver subwoofer will. That pressure doesn't have to dissipate, so it's not causing big bass pressure notes to linger in the room, causing some kind of tension and congestion, that tension that sometimes you feel on your body, which sometimes is fantastic for movies and sometimes it's fantastic for music. But like when that goes away and there's more speed and articulation and detail in the bass, that's probably better. I kind of like a bit of both, if I'm being honest. And this might not be something you even notice if you haven't lived with very big subwoofers, but regulars to this channel will know that I lived with very big subwoofers here recently in a pair of the REL number 31. So it's very understandable that I am experiencing a difference here. However, I'm going to be totally brutally honest with you. With the way I had the Red set up in here with the KEF R11 Meta, I could be really very happy with that setup because they just about did enough for me, and I'm a bit of a bass head. They just about did enough for me in terms of that big weighty room pressure feeling. They gave me just about enough, and I possibly could have squeezed more of that out of them with a bit more time and, you know, trying different placements and settings to try and squeeze more, but it was enough. It was satisfying enough for music. Of course, I'm talking about music here, but because that came with that faster, more, you know, speedy, articulate bass, I could use them higher up with a crossover, and that meant I could get a more warm, more room feeling, a more big, bold, pleasing sound out of the whole system, out of the KEF R11 Metas, much more than I can get out of the KEFs on their own. And that is a sound that I much prefer. It's more to my taste, and I think it's to a lot of people's taste. I've met a lot of people in my calibration work, and a lot of people like the sound to be, you know, bass rich and strong and warm and with a lovely pressure feeling to it. I think more people prefer that type of sound than a very dry, analytical, clinical sound, and it stands to reason. So having good subwoofers, allowing you to control and add that to a sound, you know, it's a very powerful thing. But do I recommend the Reds over the standard T9X given the higher price? And it's around £150 premium over the standard T9X. Of course, if you could buy them today. And I think that question simply boils down to the colour red. I think the decision becomes a simple one. Do you like the colour red? Can you live with the colour red subwoofer? Is that going to complement your house, your listening room? Because the black T9X is still an excellent subwoofer, and of course it's cheaper, and it's black, which is, you know, a more common colour to match up with, you know, rooms and speakers. Of course, the red is very standout and distinctive, and it kind of makes the choice easy. But I think if you like the red colour, the £150 premium for it makes sense. And really, I think the £150 premium makes sense for the performance upgrade. I would always spend just a little bit more to get a slightly better performing product. That's the kind of person I am. So the £150 for the slightly better driver, I would be happy with. But the red is the more distinct standout thing, so that will lead the decision here. But what about the future if REL release more limited editions in different colours? And what happens purely hypothetically if they released a black one, a black limited edition with this driver? Would I recommend it then? Well, in that situation, I would say if you're buying these subwoofers for the long haul, well then of course over years and years and years, that slight price increase, which is a bit more if you buy two, but the slight price increase of course is going to be worth it to you, I think, for the long haul. However, if this is going to be a stopgap subwoofer for you on the way to buying something bigger, higher performance, bigger SPL, then I would say just keep the money. Buy the standard T9X, it's still a great subwoofer. Pocket the difference and put that towards the bigger subwoofer upgrade in the future. And I know that's just all common sense advice, but that really is what it's about here. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you found it useful and helpful, especially if we see more limited editions coming in the future. That's quite exciting. And if you enjoyed the review, hit the thumbs up button. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button that's down there.